everybody. Here we are with our vocabulary flipped for U.S. history for Mrs. Clemens. And we have vocab 8. Now, just so you guys know, this quiz is going to be paragraph style. So what I did was I broke it up a little bit differently than the actual list is. And we're gonna work on this, and we're gonna talk about how we could actually write about these terms. But most of this stuff is pre-Civil War kinds of stuff. All right, so our first group of words are problems with expansion. Or terms dealing with the problems of expansion. So our first one we have is Trail of Tears. And so the deal with that was the forced movement of the Cherokee Indians. Actually, many other Native American tribes were also forced to move. So it's not necessarily just the Cherokee, but to lands west of the Mississippi River. And so you guys, we looked at something very, very similar in class, where we're talking about the Cherokee and the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole, and how they had to move to what is today Oklahoma. And just how, you know, it was this horrible, horrible experience where people are carrying, you know, their entire lives on their back. There are some horses, but generally most people are walking on foot. You see, you know, a lot of people are getting sick along the way, and it's just a horrible time period in history. So, you know, if you're writing about this, you could, you know, to explain that you know what we're talking about, you could actually give some of the details about the Trail of Tears. And one of the really great things to talk about is the case Worcester versus Georgia. And the deal with this was that the Supreme Court ruled that that only the national government can make treaties with Native American tribes and not the states. And Georgia is saying, well, hey, we don't want the Native Americans to be there. They wanted to force them to leave. And in this case, remember, John Marshall, who was the Chief Justice at the time, he says, no, definitely not, that Georgia does not have the right to do this. The problem is that Jackson didn't enforce this ruling. And remember, Jackson's the chief executive. The executive branch is supposed to enforce these things. He didn't enforce it, and he famously said, you know, Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. And so as a result, the Trail of Tears actually, you know, continued. So these two are great to put together. Part of the whole reason why we continually forced Native Americans off of their land was because of our whole idea of manifest destiny, this idea that we should expand from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And, you know, we talked about it, that once we got the Louisiana Territory, we sort of got that taste for land. And, you know, it's sort of like once you have one ship, it's not enough. That was the thing. Once we got one piece of land, it wasn't enough. We would push whoever we needed to off the land so we could have it. And an example of this is the Mexican-American War, where after we annexed Texas, we say, we want more. And the president behind that, we'll talk about in a second, is James K. Polk. And so, yeah, you know, basically here you have, you know, this whole battle, this whole 2-year war being fought between the United States and Mexico over this territory dispute over the Rio Grande. We said we owned up to the Rio Grande. Mexico said we owned farther north. And yeah, you know, this was a big deal in the 1840s, excuse me. As a result, you could definitely talk about how we gained the Mexican cession, that we gained California, Nevada, Utah, part of Colorado, part of New Mexico, part of Arizona. And you can even talk about how California, you know, when it came in, it's a free state, and, you know, a lot of people moved there, and, you know, the whole idea of gold. But you can also talk about how it achieved our goal of manifest destiny. So it's definitely, you know, talking about manifest destiny and talking about the Mexican-American War definitely go great together. And you can't talk about the Mexican-American War without talking about James K. Polk. Remember, he was the guy who said, all right, listen, you know, elect me in 4 years. I'm going to achieve manifest destiny. I'm going to get all this stuff for you. So he helps to kind of pick that war with Mexico. We end up, you know, winning, and we get all that land. And there he is, as I said, with his very sexy hairdo. All right, so some of the issues that happened because of slavery. the Compromise of 1850. So the reason why we have to have this compromise is because of the Mexican-American War and because we get the Mexican Cession. So those, if you wanted to talk about the Mexican Cession, Manifest Destiny, the Mexican-American War, the Compromise of 1850 goes really, really great with it. And so, yeah, absolutely, we balance in California as a free state, and it balances out the annexation with Texas, and we have the fugitive slave law. So you can see here's California. It comes in as a free state to balance out Texas. You've got this area here that they're open to slavery. They had to vote. They could use popular sovereignty to decide whether they were going to be free or slave. And so basically they're saying the Missouri Compromise line is just a line right here. That's it. It doesn't go anywhere else in the country. It doesn't keep going off to the side. So you could definitely talk about this as sort of Missouri Compromise 2.0, that it's the next thing we needed to do when we gain more land. Well, because the fugitive slave law was just awful, we end up getting, and we had abolition actually even in the late 1700s, there were abolitionists, but now it becomes in the 1850s huge, just huge, and not just this fringe movement. And that's the movement to end slavery. And so what we're going to be talking about now is some of the different actions that were taken to try to accomplish that goal of abolition of slavery. So in our next slide, we're going to have Harriet Beecher Stowe, but she wrote this novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And here she is. She's a woman who did not own slaves, and she wrote this book, and it's a novel, so there was no actual guy named Uncle Tom, but she writes this novel about the horrors of slavery, and it's readable, and people can empathize with it. And so they get a lot more people in the North are saying, oh, I get it, slavery is really bad. And in the South, they are like, basically threatening to string up Harriet Beecher Stowe, and they were having book burning parties. I mean, this was just such a major thing. Another thing that really gets the abolitionists going is the Dred Scott decision. This is the case where Dred Scott, he was with his master, taken to free states. He says, I'm going to sue for my freedom, goes to the Supreme Court, and this is just one of those horrible, horrible cases. It says, first off, dude, you can't even sue because, even if you were free, you're black, and black people aren't citizens, so sucks to be you. He says slaves are property, so slaves can be taken anywhere. It doesn't matter. And he even goes on to say, just kind of on top of that, that the Missouri Compromise was even unconstitutional, that states should be able to decide whether or not they want to be free or slave, sort of that whole popular sovereignty idea. So as a result, you get a lot more people that are speaking out and saying, oh my God, this is awful. And so here's a picture of Dred Scott. We also have the Underground Railroad. That's another method well, obviously a method of abolition, trying to help slaves to escape captivity. And so much up here, we're from New York, so we talk about, people going north into Canada, but definitely there were people that went south, into Mexico. But yeah, absolutely, people are going north just trying to escape slavery. And because of the Fugitive Slave Act, they can't just stop in the free states. They need to go up to Canada. And please, 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 like I had a kid one year that said that it was an underground subway. No, there's no actual train. It's just, the method of sort of sneaking people, to freedom. Different paths, different people helped out along the way. All right, and then our last group of words are the various people, the various abolitionists. So Harriet Tubman, you guys have talked about her in terms of, the conductor of the Underground Railroad, but she does so much more. So here she is, leading people on the Underground Railroad. But she helped out a lot during the Civil War. She helped out in terms of nursing people. She helped out as a spy. I mean, this is just an amazing, amazing woman who risked her life for so many people and just did great things. Like when we talk about humanitarian, man, awesome. Just amazing, amazing things. Frederick Douglass, he was born a slave also, and he escaped too. And part of what his experience was that his family or his master had taught him how to read and write. And so when he comes up north and escapes, he's a fervent lecturer and is able to speak eloquently, and he changes a lot of people's opinions about African Americans. He's active in the Underground Railroad, just like a lot of these guys. They all kind of knew each other. Later on, when we're talking about the suffrage movement, we'll talk about how he also helped out even with women's rights. So another just phenomenal person. Sojourner Truth is sort of local to us. She was born in Ulster County in New York, and so she also escaped. And so she's an abolitionist also and a women's rights activist. She helped to recruit troops for the Union Army, and even tried to help out slaves following the Civil War. So she's just another person that just gave her life trying to help, to help others. John Brown's a little bit different. John Brown was not a slave. He actually was white. And he uses, these guys, I mean, like Harriet Tubman's, kind of stealing people, but she's not using violence. Frederick Douglass is using the power of words, Sojourner Truth, to an extent, using the power of words. John Brown, he's using violence. And so the two things we have with him is Bleeding Kansas, where basically he goes and starts killing abolitionists, and the raid on Harper's Ferry later on, where he tries to start a slave uprising. In the end, he's hung, but he serves as this example to sort of lead people forward. And he's, his death happened so close to the start of the Civil War. People are singing songs about him as they're marching into battle. And there's a picture of John Brown. I tried to find one where his hair wasn't quite so crazy. And then our last person is William Lloyd Garrison. And so, like we talked about, these guys are kind of more with their words. William Lloyd Garrison is absolutely with his words. He's another white person who published a newspaper called The Liberator. And his whole thing is saying we need to end slavery. And so definitely some of these guys ended up writing for The Liberator. They definitely all read The Liberator. And he said slavery needs to end. And there's William Lloyd Garrison. Well, guys, I hope that this was helpful and that you'll study a bunch for our quiz.